Well, maybe let's back up and say that we had a field of criminology for decades, you can date it in a lot of different ways and in a lot of different places. But my pet theory is that we started at the University of Chicago, and scholars that were there took a particular kind of approach. It's been described as an ecological approach to crime and delinquency. They were very empirically oriented, and they studied, mostly quantitatively, delinquency rates in certain neighborhoods. And they had some keen and important insights. Number one, they were focusing on a city that was not a port city, and that's an important difference, say, from places like New York and Los Angeles. It was an urban center, an industrial center. So it was the birth of urban sociology and a focus on crime and delinquency. We're talking about people like Clifford Shaw and McKay and other early basically sociologists who were studying crime. But they were completely focused on male crime, and in fact often would study and only report boys. So you had the classic example that's qualitative is Clifford Shaw's Brothers in Crime, looking at the males in this family, and all of them were criminally involved. And of course, particularly when you talk about serious offending, there's some justice or some justification on focusing on boys and men, because they commit the lion's share of serious and violent delinquency and crime. But there were girls around the boys. They were often involved even in gang life, it turns out. But if you read Thrasher, The Gang, you really don't, there's a chapter in The Gang called Sex and the Gang, which is really about sexual assault. But this is the only time he focused on girls. So it was a very, gendered worldview that those criminologists brought to the issue. Ironically, in that same city, there was a social worker, and she invented the field of social work while they were busy doing criminology. And we're talking about Hull House, and we're talking about, I've lost her name now, help me out. I think it's Abigail. No, that's, I'm getting Abigail Adams. Jane Addams starts the field of social work in Chicago. And she, of course, is looking at the experience of immigrants. And many of the people that she worked with were girls. So she's understanding that there's quite a difference in the kinds of problems that girls and women had and the kinds of problems that the boys and men had. But she, again, brings that kind of social work gaze, even though she was trained as a sociologist. But I think she's a kind of lost figure, so I hasten to mention her. So anyway, when I was studying delinquency, I sort of backed into the study of delinquency. I have to talk maybe a little bit about that. I was looking for a master's thesis topic, and my mentor had gotten all these juvenile court files from Hawaii, just sort of dumped into this room. And there was a guy there coding. And because I was involved in the women's movement, I asked him, Dutch, do you ever see girls' files? And he said, oh, every once in a while. Yeah, I see a girl's file. So I said, would you just put them aside for me when you see them? And I didn't realize what I was going to get into when I did that, but I was astonished at what was happening to the girls. And specifically what was happening to the girls was, especially in the early years of the juvenile justice system, there were plenty of girls in court. Unlike the delinquency theorists that weren't paying attention to girls, the court officials were paying attention to girls, but in a very negative way. They were very focused on girls' sexuality and punishing girls for being sexually active. And the early offenses that girls were brought into the system for were things like sexual immorality. I mean, they literally used these words. They gave girls gynecological exams and determined if they were virgins or not. I mean, it was a very negative experience for the girls that were being brought into that system. And I looked at that and I said, oh my God, somebody has to write about this. So that was how I got started. And I really am a bottom-up, data-driven person. I'm not really a theorist. I clutch at theories, you know, when I'm trying to make sense of what I see. But one of the things you mentioned, you know, that I think is key to feminist approaches to crime is a focus on gender and a focus on the gender hierarchies and the way in which the criminal justice system and the juvenile justice system are engaged in enforcement of male privilege. And that was certainly happening with girls being punished for being sexually active. There was no effort to punish the boys for that kind of behavior in those years. So, and there were more girls, when I started looking at girls in the juvenile justice system, there were more girls in training schools than there were women in prison. So it was a huge issue. It was a huge issue and the girls were there for these, even in the contemporary times, you know, when I was doing this research, they were still there for what we call status offenses, running away from home. And that's a proxy for being sexually active. So the juvenile justice system has been obsessed with girls and sexuality and punishing girls for being sexually active and paying no attention to that behavior at all in boys. So it's pretty obvious that they're involved in the enforcement of not only parental, because the girls were often in arguments with their parents, you know, the parents would turn the girls over to the system, and that's haunted the juvenile justice system to this day. Parents want the juvenile justice system involved in punishing their girls for going out with boys they don't approve of, essentially, and being sexually active. And no parent of a boy is generally going to the system for this kind of concern. So that's how I backed into it. And because I was involved in the women's movement, I knew there were theories that I could go look at and access, and that's essentially what I did. But it's people always ask me, you know, what theories informed my thinking, and that wasn't the way it happened. For me, it was a visceral focus on this isn't right, this shouldn't be happening to girls, and then, you know, backing up to figure out, you know, what might explain these patterns. So I'm not a theorist. Okay. But despite the fact that they now call me, you know, this major theorist in criminology, I'm like, it doesn't. I'm delighted to hear people think that. But I've always thought theory is a sort of top-down, Platonic approach, and I'm an Aristotelian thinker. I'm bottom up. You know, what's down there and what makes sense of it.